Hi, my name is Lauren Ward, and I'm an attorney with a business law firm. And today I'm going to give you a webinar on if you're starting your own business or you're an entrepreneur and interested in doing that, some quick tips just to help those who are ready to get started on their own journey with their own business. So once again, I'm Lauren Ward, and my email is on here if you do have questions. So if this is your first time joining me, a little bit about me. I'm a graduate of the University of South Carolina, where I have a BS in biology. I then went on to the University of South Carolina School of Law, and I graduated in 2013. And my main practice areas are estate planning, Medicaid planning, and business planning. So this webinar is part of the business area I practice in to help those who are ready to start their business. So today we're going to talk about a business setup, having proper documents in place, and once we've got this business up and running, how we want to handle it with needing help. Do we want employees or do we want independent contractors? And I have recorded a full webinar before on employees versus independent contractors. So if you do get to that step, feel free to look at my YouTube channel and you'll find an entire webinar on that topic. We're just going to briefly touch on it today. So my first piece of advice when you're starting in a business is typically you're going to want to incorporate in some way to become some type of business entity. We do this because we want to protect our personal assets. We do not want to have our assets at risk if we were to get sued. We don't want our home coming into play, our personal bank accounts. We want to make sure that this business is a separate entity for us. So if anything happens, we have it separated and it is completely not us, it's a separate structure. And the way we do this is registering our business with the Secretary of State, and we're going to think about what structure we want to be. And there's a few different structures you can use. In South Carolina, a lot of people pick the LLC. This is a limited liability company. It is a newer creature than the corporations, but it is still going to give you that asset protection you need if you follow the proper way to handle your LLC. Sometimes we look at a statutory corporation, which is a corporation that not all states have, but we do here. And the nice thing about it, it's not as complicated as a full corporation. You do not have to have a board of directors. You only need your president and secretary as your officers. And it's a pretty simple corporation to set up. And then we have our basic corporation with the board of directors and those type things. With an LLC, you have what's known as an operating agreement, and that governs it. With a statutory corporation, we use bylaws. And with the corporation, we can have some shareholder management agreements and a lot of different documents that work for that. The two most common ways we see people set up for the most part for new businesses is the LLC and the statutory corporation. It's a good idea to sit down with an attorney and go over the pros and cons of each, but definitely looking to set up one of these makes it important. So we're getting that personal asset protection and we're having a separate entity from us, and that is just the business. We are not the business. Our personal assets, we want to keep those separate from the business, and the way to do that is to do an LLC or a statutory corporation or corporation. If you don't do anything and you start a business, you're what's known as a sole proprietor or a partnership if there's two of you, and those don't give you any protections. Your personal assets are at risk with those. So we don't typically like to see those situations because we want to make sure that we're protecting your personal assets. That's why we have these corporate structures here. When we're thinking about our business structure, it's also important to think about our tax structure. And sometimes we need to get our CPAs involved to make sure we're doing the best thing for our taxes. There's different ways to be taxed. You can be taxed as a sole proprietorship, a partnership, an S corporation, and depending on which business structure you pick, depends on your tax structure. So an LLC has a lot of taxable flexibility and can be taxed a lot of different ways. It can be taxed as an S corp, a sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation. A statutory closed corporation tends to be taxed as an S corp. And these are things we want to discuss with your accountant to see what's best for you. From what I've understood, if you're going to be making more than $50,000 in profit, somewhere between 50 and 100, that's when you really want to start looking at the S corporation. But I like to double check with your accountant what he or she prefers to. So starting your business is not just going to see an attorney or an accountant. It's a combination of all of us, because we want to be legally protected and we want to be protected tax-wise too. So we want to make sure we're doing everything we can. So if we get into litigation, you get sued or something, we're doing everything to protect you, to make sure those personal assets aren't at risk legally. And that's why it's important to understand your business structure and pick the one that's right for you to protect you, in that your personal assets won't be at risk, because we've helped to make sure you're doing everything properly with your structure to not pierce the corporate veil, which there is a whole webinar on dealing with piercing the corporate veil, I believe, as well. If that's something, if not, I'll definitely do one on those, but that's definitely something all business owners need to keep in place. So while you're incorporating, like we talked about, you want to make sure you're using your properly following corporate formalities. You want to make sure you are not paying your personal bills from your business account. You are treating this business as a third person, because you don't want to get in trouble for piercing the corporate veil or acting like this business and you are the same entity. So that way there's no protections for you. When you're signing documents, you want to make sure you're using your correct title, depending on how you set up. If you're an LLC, we may use member, and then if you're a corporation, president, secretary, those type things. But you're going to want to sign your name as Jane Doe, and Jane Doe, President, Jane Doe, Inc. Those type things, to make sure that you're showing that you are an incorporated entity, or you're an LLC, Jane Doe member, Jane Doe LLC. You want to get an EIN number, which is like a social security number for your business, and set up a proper bank account with that number, not your social security number. You want to set it up separately. You also want to keep track of your expenses properly. So maybe you need to hire somebody that's going to help you with this to do your books, or maybe you want to get QuickBooks. You want to make sure you're properly tracking these expenses for legal purposes and making sure you're not getting in trouble for piercing the corporate veil, but also for tax purposes as well. One thing we don't want to do with the company is have it underfunded, because that is a way to have it pierce the corporate veil. So I think it's important to make sure we know what you're doing financially and having that right group of people to help you out. Another thing you'll want to think about that I don't have listed here, but as part of starting a business, is insurance. Making sure you have that insurance policy you need in place, depending on what type business it is, what type policy you need. But it's important to make sure you have that team of professionals, your attorney, your accountant, somebody to help you with payroll if needed, and insurance to help you make sure you have your business properly set up and you're covered. But the first thing is definitely incorporate. So we've done that. We've got our business set up. We decided we're going to be an LLC, and we've decided we're going to be taxed as an S Corp. We've got our bank account, our EIN numbers. We're making sure we're following corporate formalities. So what else do we need to have in place when we're starting a business? What about contracts? Are you working with clients? Are you working with vendors? Are you going to need things that will require proper legal documentation? So say you have clients in place, you might want to have a terms and services, terms and conditions they agree to for your business. You might want to have a contract that sets out your fee structure. And when you have these contracts, it's important to let an attorney review them to say, hey, you don't have a clause in here for if you end up in court, being able to collect for court costs. You don't have an attorney's fees clause in here. You know, this contract is lacking this, and this that we normally want to see in a contract. So it's important to have those contracts in place, either with vendors or clients or whoever it is you're interacting with, because as we know, word of mouth and a handshake doesn't always hold up in court and isn't going to protect you like having that written out contract is. If you're a business that has risk, thinking about having those waivers of liability. Maybe you're running a bowling alley and you know you want to have everybody come in and sign a liability waiver because there's a harm in it. Somebody could drop a ball and break their toe. You're running a hunt club where there's firearms and things being used. You want to make sure you have those waivers that you make people sign. And that just depends on your business. Do you need to have non-compete agreements? Are you bringing in people that you want to make sure don't compete with you or don't solicit your business? Do we need to look at having those non-competes in place for those type things? When you're going to need help, we're going to dig into this a little bit more, but having those employee or independent contractor agreements, depending on which way you go, if you're going to have an employee or an independent contractor, do you want an employee handbook? Do you need those independent contractor agreements? Which I would say, yes, you want to have independent contractor agreements. And you may want that employee handbook. You may want an employment agreement. Those are all things you want to discuss with your attorney to make sure everything is properly done, so you have everything in place. It is important not to just have this business set up, but to have those contracts and things. So if you do get sued, you're like, no, here's the contract. This is what we set out for. This is what's in here. It's all on the terms of the document. We know what should happen, and you have a much better argument in court when you know what the terms are, because when you have those handshakes, it's he said, she said. So this is all stuff you want to think about when you're setting up your business. So you get to the point that you're set up your business and you need help. Do you want an employee or do you want an independent contractor? And that really depends on what you're looking for. But I think it's important that you understand the difference between the two, so you know which one is best for your business. And these could change over time. You may start out with independent contractors because you don't need as much help, or this is the structure that works for you. And then you get to the point, I need somebody to be in the office, 40 hours a week and here 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It depends on your business structure, and it doesn't mean these things won't change over time. So an independent contractor provides goods or services under a written or verbal agreement. They're not an employee. You don't have control over them for the most part. They're just providing you services, which an employee is a person employed for wages or a salary. So typically an independent contractor is not, you don't have as much control over. They set their own hours and wages, and both of you can end the relationship at any time typically, but they're not an employee. You do not have to deal with their taxes, withholdings, and those type of things. So you're pretty much telling them, this is what I need done, get it done in this amount of time, and I'm going to pay you X amount of money for doing it. A lot of times this is a structure that works out well for a new business. Maybe you just need somebody to come in and do marketing here and there, and you expect so many posts a week, and you pay them based on getting that done, but you're not having them come in the office. You're not telling them what to do all the time. They're just handling this for you. Maybe you are a contract business and a contractor, and you just need to outsource someone to paint the house. These are times independent contractors can be great. It also can be good, maybe you're running a salon and you want to hire a hairstylist under your salon, and they set their own hours, come in when they want to work, and you pay them based on those type things. So it just depends on what you want, but it's pretty much, they have a lot of their own control and flexibility. With an employee, on the other hand, you control them. You tell them when to come to work, and you set a lot more confusion. You set a lot more requirements, which leads to a lot less confusion sometimes. You tell them when to be at work, you tell them all their tasks, you tell them what they have to do. And so there's less confusion because there is that employer-employee relationship, because you have that control. So to depend on what you want, you have to look at the job structure and what you need. Do you want somebody flexible and just complete work projects as needed? Or do you want somebody at your front desk answering phones all day? Are you wanting to truly manage or just have work completed? I think it's important to understand with an employer independent contractor, I just needing help on these projects and somebody to come in and do this work and let them do it when they want to, or do I want to control somebody, tell them when to come to work, what to do every day? Looking at it from those perspectives is what you really have to do to understand which one works best for you. And then that's a conversation you have with your attorney too, and say, this is what I'm looking for, which structure works best. And the reason it matters which one you pick is because the tax problems. Are you going to be withholding, not withholding their taxes and those type things? And you need to have that clear and specified. If they're an independent contractor, no. An employee, yes. If they're truly independent contractors, you may not need workers' compensation insurance, which if they're employees, you do. And it's important to make sure you're actually labeling as what they really are. And are you liable for their negligence? Independent contractors, a truly independent contractor, typically no, you're not an employee. If they're on the job and doing what you ask them to do, you could be. So it really depends on the situation you're wanting, but that's why it matters, because these things come into play. And this is where you end up in court sometimes, is dealing with these issues. Real quick, the independent contractor test I have listed here is what instructions are they required to comply with? What's their training? Are they integral to your business? Can they hire their own employees? Do you make them work certain hours? Are they full-time? Where do they do their work? How are they paid? How do they pay expenses? Who has the tools and materials and right to discharge and quit? So that's just a test we use to see if they're an independent contractor. So I think reviewing what you need with this test in mind is how you really decide if you're getting an independent contractor or not. And it's important to know which one you have. So when you're setting up your business, big thing is set it up with a proper structure that works for you legally and tax-wise, because you do want to incorporate it and have that business set up, maybe LLC, maybe statutory closed corporation, maybe you want the full corporation. You want to have those proper documents in places, like having an independent contractor agreement if you're going to have one of those, having contracts with your clients or vendors, having a waiver of liability if that's what you need. You want to make sure you're doing your payroll and everything properly, or you're properly handling your accounting and QuickBooks and everything, you know, making sure you properly invoice your clients and how your invoices are done. One quick tip on invoices: make sure it tells you when it's due. You don't want to have it with no due date, because then it's when is it actually due? Nobody knows. You want to have either due on receipt or maybe due in 15 days, 30 days. You want to have a timeline on there for those invoices. And when you do get to the point you want to hire people, you want to think about, do we want an independent contractor or an employee? Which is a better fit for me and my business? And what am I really looking for? So these are just some quick tips and getting started with your own business. If you're an entrepreneur and wanting to, you know, break out, and, you know, in the new year, it is a great time to think about starting your own business and making your own goals for the year. And a lot of times we see a lot of people want to start and incorporate at this time. So just wanted to share these tips for you if that's one of your goals for the new year. You know, first quarter in the new year, trying to start this business. And that is all I have for you today. But if you do have questions, once again, I'm Lauren Ward, an attorney with A Business Law Firm here in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And feel free to send me an email or give me a call. And thank you for joining me today. And I look forward to hosting more webinars in the future, and we'll definitely keep you updated about those. We hope you have a great day.